Well, great. We're 9:03. Have plenty of people rolling in still. But yeah, we're super excited to have you, Craig. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you
Thanks for having
taking time out of your morning to kind of give us an update on what's happening in real estate in New York. Wanted to give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself and share more about what you're doing at Marks Realty. And yeah, we'd love to kind of hear your background story.
Sure. So I started out as a lawyer at Skadden Arps, originally a litigator and then a real estate lawyer, and did that for some time, which I think is actually a great experience for anyone going into development, just because everything is, legal. There's documents for everything. So I think that's really helpful. And then ultimately switched to work for a developer. Learned pretty early on I had an aptitude for repositioning assets. So I repositioned assets in New York, DC, Boston initially, then switched to a private equity fund, and there worked really across the country in all different asset classes, and which was really helpful because today, all these asset classes have really converged. So that's really been the genesis for our hospitality infused office because, we're working in hotels, working in office, and there's some elements of each that really work really nicely together. And Marks, I joined about 3 years ago. The company is 105 years old. We have some really amazing assets, and my board tasked me with repositioning all of these assets and really rethinking our real estate to make them more valuable, but also just more in tune with today's needs. So, 10 Grand Central, for instance, was one that we repositioned where we really infused it with office. It's actually the first building in New York that was truly hospitality infused throughout. And what that means is, we have a doorman outside, we have our Mark signature scent in the lobby, we have music, water, just the whole look and feel of it. And it's not just the lobby, it goes throughout the property. So we have a club floor and a lounge and a cafe and boardrooms and outdoor seating. And then even the particular offices are all infused with hospitality. So, and it's really been, quite successful, and we're doing it now elsewhere in New York at 545 Madison, as well as in DC and Atlanta. And then on the retail front, we've owned for about 65 years Cross County Shopping Center, which is in a suburb of New York in Westchester County, Yonkers, and it's the nation's first open-air shopping center. And so we've been really re-looking at that asset, even though it's so successful already, but just making it more successful for the future and changing up the retail mix and the restaurants and more outdoor areas and more, more summer fests and jazz fests and all that type of stuff, just making it much more fun as well. And then at Marks, we've been hiring really the best people in around and really getting everyone to have this culture of excellence that we've instilled in everyone. So it's been really exciting.
Well, so one question I wanted to ask, a little bit unrelated to the New York scene, but you mentioned you had an aptitude for repositioning. Curious, like how would you define that aptitude? Like what made you good at repositioning?
I think it's really a focus on the details and design and just really thinking about how the customer uses a property. So, it happens from the approach and just I'll look at a property and just say, that just looks awful. Who wants to office there? And so really just thinking about, that whole white marble, gray marble, mausoleum-like building, it doesn't have to be that way. So just really kind of rethinking about that, rethinking about the flow of a building and where the entrance wants to be, for example, and how the customer is really using the space. And also just really talking to tenants and saying, would you use this? Would you use that? What do you think of this? And, oftentimes what we found is even the architects, and we worked with some really wonderful ones, they actually don't quite, I think they think what they would like as opposed to what a tenant would like, and also what the tenant experiences is on their daily life. So, so that's really how it came to be. And then, some of the first, sometimes if I guess I was lucky, some of the original repositionings I did were very successful early on. And then that gives you the confidence to do more and more of them.
Sure. Yeah. So, just to give people a sense, obviously the topic of discussion today is kind of what's happening on the ground in New York, specifically related to real estate. And, we've had a couple of interesting conversations about how your day-to-day has changed and just how you're getting business done, how deals are happening. Generally, do you mind just giving us an overview of what you've seen shift in the New York market? Obviously, a lot has changed, but more specifically related to real estate, what have you seen?
Sure. I mean, right now we're spending a lot of time on rent collections, so in our office portfolio, we're about 97%, a little higher than that right now. So the office portfolio, the tenants have been very good about paying rents, their rent. On the retail side, it's not been so great. We're probably about 50% across our portfolio. And some of the larger tenants in particular who have the ability to pay have not. And then we're working with some of the mom and pops to help them out, during this time. And then also some of the retailers and restaurants that are part of our placemaking, we really want them to be successful. So we're working with them. But we've actually developed, various working task groups to help us reach out to tenants, help collect rents and figure out a solution there. Help them get SBA loans if that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been a big part of my time, as well as we closed an asset in DC, an office building, 1307 New York, the Herald. So we closed that last week. And during this time, thank you. The small little things turn into big things when you're home and not in the office. So it really helps you appreciate how helpful it is to be in an office environment. For instance, even getting documents notarized. In the office, you just go down the hall and someone's there and they notarize it. In this environment, you have to plan ahead. We had a notary. First, I had to find a notary. She came to my house in her car. She wouldn't leave her car. So I had to go outside, sign the documents in front of her, put them all on the ground with a rock on top of it. I went into my house. She went out of her car. She started signing them. Then she left them outside with a rock, and she was wearing gloves and a mask. And so all those things are just things you really have to anticipate, which are hard to anticipate. Or just getting know your customer type searches were not easy to do in this environment when courts are closed.
Yeah.
So it was really just a lot of planning and coordination, and then just on the personal side. My son has become my IT expert, which I need very much. And then my daughter has been baking like crazy, which is very bad. So lots of desserts all the time in this household.
Could be worse. Could be worse.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like how, when you start to think about your existing assets, you mentioned a little bit of focusing on rent collections. I imagine you're doing some sort of predictive work about, like this month and probably May, a little bit of March was a completely uncertain time. And, I think maybe some of the rent collection numbers that you're seeing specifically on the retail side, like hopefully those rebound a bit as things get more certain and we kind of, we do some reentry. People are actually out shopping again. I mean, how are you thinking about how we come out of this from a retail perspective? Before we even jump into office, what do you think shifts when New York goes back to work?
So I think whatever trends you were seeing before are now accelerated with COVID by maybe 3 to 5 years. So certain retailers that were struggling before, they won't exist, and probably that makes sense. They shouldn't exist. I think you will continue to see a trend of retailers that are vibrant, and I think really the answer is twofold. So in the short term, you're not going to see things that make sense. So in the short term, people aren't going to be at a bar, right. But long term, everyone wants to socialize and be at a bar, and we can't wait to do it. So I think there's a short term where it's going to get back, and there'll be every other table in the restaurant, for instance, and then even at large retailers, it's probably going to be limited as to how many people could go in and at what times and that kind of stuff. But I think what the trend is long-term will continue, which is some of these, malls or areas that just have retailers that shouldn't exist, like JCPenney, for instance, it just won't exist anymore at some point. And that trend will be accelerated. And I think the whole entertainment and experience and fun that shopping should be, all of that will become that much more important in the long term.
Yeah. Do you, so I think there's an interesting point you mentioned about helping out your existing retail tenants to help them navigate the situation. So you mentioned you're helping them with SBA loans, like some of the PPP stuff. Is there anything else that you all are trying to do to kind of cater to the retail folks? I mean, I imagine it's just heavy communication, maybe trying to make them feel more comfortable with, with their lease terms. I'm not exactly sure, but curious, like what you're thinking about there.
Sure. Well, for some of the smaller ones that really, wouldn't be able to survive, we're deferring their rent. It depends in terms of the duration, and they pay it back over time as their business does better. For some of them, we have some that were under construction, so we're moving out their rent date, obviously, because they can't construct their store. So we're just being reasonable with all that type of stuff. Some of them we're allowing them to draw down on their letter of credit and replenish it later on to help them through this time. And then, when we go back to work, we're really going to be promoting their businesses. And even now we're promoting it. Some of them are open right now, the restaurants in particular, but they're doing carry out and takeout. And we're promoting that online and social media to just help them in any way we can. Kind of being their partner.
Sure. So when you think about your current holdings, and you look at kind of assessing valuations across the board for your current holdings, how are you looking at each asset class and maybe the drop in valuations that have come out of COVID? So maybe by office, retail, and any other commercial spaces that you have.
Sure. So I think it's a little early to ascertain valuations. It's just, it sort of depends on when you come back to work. Most of our office buildings are, we're very selective about the tenants in our buildings. So they're tenants with great credit, and that's why we're almost 100% in terms of rent collections. And we're almost fully leased in all of our properties too. So we're really well suited for this situation, and we're thinking much more long term than just what's the valuation today. And one of the things about Marks, which I think is pretty unique, is we're not very highly levered. And we have a lot of cash on hand, so that really puts us in a position where we could really think about the long term and really do what's right for our properties and for our tenants. And we think if you do that and kind of think about for office, for instance, what is the office of the future, and start doing those types of things today, and not just for the short term, because there's a short term and a long term, but for the long term, we think that valuations will be helped by that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious when you think about your acquisition strategy now versus pre-COVID, are you like more drawn to a specific asset class, and especially in New York?
Yes. So we are, and we have been, and we continue to be focused on office in New York. So we're actually looking at some hotels and thinking about converting those to office, which is a new way of thinking since the hotel sector is so hard hit. And in terms of the type of office that we're looking at, it's shifted a little bit. I think in the past, we would have preferred a building that's 100% vacant. Now, during this time, because everything's on hold, we'd prefer that the building is largely leased up, but then has a role in a year or 2 years, so we can do our repositioning and get the increased rents. That's really what's preferable for us. And then also we're looking at buildings that have large co-working groups, for instance, that might not make sense for today's tenants. So that changed a little bit as well. And then also, in New York, we always look at supply and demand. That's just something that's really important to us. And there's been a lot of supply of buildings with large floor plates. So we're looking at more boutique buildings as well.
Okay. Actually, how do you assess supply and demand? Like, how do you draw from essentially the quantity of supply and try to measure demand and when is a good time to buy?
Yeah, so I mean, in New York right now, so if you look at where the supply was, it's new construction
Yeah.
on the office side, let's say, so it's mostly in Hudson Yards, a little bit in the World Trade Center as well. Those are really the two big places where there's been a lot of supply. There's been, an individual building that happened in Grand Central, let's say, and some in Midtown South, but really, by and large, it's really been Hudson Yards where there's just been, so much supply that's been over there. And all of that property type is really the same type of floor plate.
Sure.
So that's kind of what we're thinking about there. And then on the hotel side, I mean, you just look at trends over time, and now there's just so many more rooms that have opened up and will continue to open up, or at least are planned to open up in New York. And you just have to think, where is all this demand coming from? The same, even on retail, there only can be so many retailers that make sense. So are those retailers going to pay the kind of product that they can when there's all these vacant storefronts on Fifth Avenue in New York? They won't. So prices will go down there.
Sure.
So, kind of just normal, typical economics 101.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned, and by the way, I saw a couple questions come in. George, I saw you had a couple questions for Craig. So we'll make sure to get to these sort of at the end of the conversation. And yeah, if anyone else has questions for Craig, please feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll make sure to address them. So you mentioned co-working. I'm curious to kind of go down that path and hear what you think about how co-working comes out of this. Obviously the open space dynamic is, I think, going to be a bit precarious to solve for. I don't imagine if you had a hot desk at a co-working space, and actually speaking as someone who does, I'm not very excited about running back into that scenario. Sure. But also I am somewhat excited about getting back, to the office, at least a couple of days a week. So while I'm not excited about, kind of the traffic and some of the interactions, having to touch a lot of different choke points when I go back into the office, I am looking forward to the social aspect. But yeah, I'm curious, how are you thinking that co-working comes out of this? Is there a surge in demand because of the flexibility of the leases and because of the flexibility of essentially of the rent prices? Or is there just a complete dearth of demand because people are like, hey, I'm not going into this crowded co-working space in the middle of New York or Chicago, or wherever it is?
So, yeah. I've always thought that co-working, with the amount of co-working that's out there, doesn't make sense. These co-working groups have a durational mismatch with the long-term leases that they enter into and the licenses that they have with groups such as yourself. And when there's a recessionary period or any economic downturn, you're not going to go there, or you might rethink, or you might think you can get it for, less rent. And so it's almost like a hotel in that regard, and it's not a good business to be in when there's a recessionary time period and people are cash constrained. So we think that co-working is toast. And today's world in particular, I mean, we've been getting a lot of calls from co-working tenants saying, we don't want to go into our co-working space again. Do you have any space available? I don't want all these strangers in our space, and I don't like how constrained it is, and I feel like it's dirty. All these types of comments that we've heard have really been amped up recently. And then I think what this means is interesting on just the office side, because right now there's been this densification of the office product, and we predict that now people will want to spread out a little bit more. And again, it's a trend that was happening before, even though you didn't hear about it much, and you wouldn't read about it so much, but it really was happening. People really did want more space. That was, and wanted more offices and didn't want to have someone, sneezing on top of them. And now this will just be accelerated. So, people likely will be 6 feet apart, and the whole office layouts will be changed somewhat. And I think this is actually a good thing for office owners because people need to rethink about how they're using their space and will need more space. There is a concern that because people are working from home that they're going to say, I don't need to be in the office,
Right.
as much. But I do think it's critical for that culture and collaboration and team building and all of those types of things that are just so important that are hard to do, through Zoom. So, I know from my team, I miss everyone. We all want to be back at the office, working together, especially if you're looking at a plan or you're working on an acquisition. It's just really hard to do in this kind of environment. There is a possibility that people will decide that, they'll allow their employees to work from home one day a week or something like that. I could see that happening. But by and large, I think people will be in the office and they won't share a desk. They'll have a designated desk that's clean and all of that. And then how we're looking at the office as well is, I kind of touched on it before, less touch points. So we always had a doorman. We've always used copper and brass hardware, and we're going to be using more of that. And just because those are antimicrobial materials, so I think you'll see a lot more of that. We're looking at our ductwork and clean air, how we handle that. We haven't really found a good solution for it just yet, because it's good in terms of killing germs, but not necessarily COVID. Buildings that have windows that can be opened are really helpful to get that clean air in. So we have some that meet that criteria. But I think that we've already gotten calls from tenants who are saying, when we come back, we want to spread out more and do have more space. So we think that's going to be a trend that, probably will take a while. I think people are going to, come back slowly, so they don't need it day one. Sure. I think that's something that's going to happen in an ongoing basis.
Yeah, so this is a good, I think, a good segue into a little bit what we discussed on the phone a few weeks ago regarding just trends that come out of this. I mean, and this is like highly specific to New York, I think, too. So, I mean, I'm sure you've heard of the healthy building movement and thinking through how to actually create a living healthy building, indoor air quality. I saw someone just mention a question about indoor air quality, so we'll make sure to get to that. But curious how you think technology plays a role in building the healthy building. We've talked about frictionless access control. You using specific hardware is an interesting concept. But yeah, curious, like, what technologies do you think would have a role in creating a healthy building environment?
Sure. So we have an app that we were talking about. It's called Marks Connect, and that's how you access the building through Bluetooth. And guests come in that way too, so they don't have to stop and go through security and show their cards and do that exchange. It's all, seamless through the app and Bluetooth, and it works the elevators that way and access into the tenant space that way as well if they desire. And we're looking right now at putting into that app a way that if you're too close, that it could give you a little ding or a vibrate or something like that. You can program it so it's not, offensive. We want it to be, comfortable and seamless. But I think that's the way to do it. I think elevators is a really big concern, and how do you handle that? Right. And that's something that I think technology can really help too, just in terms of, programming the best times for people to go to space, and even in the elevator, making sure that people aren't too close, and then controlling the air as well. So the app can have a way to measure the air quality and the flow of the air and things of that nature. So I think that will be helpful. While we've been home, I've been using DocuSign a lot, AvidXchange a lot for bill paying and things of that nature. So I think all of those it makes you realize how useful that is for your daily business. And, we plan on using that. It's not just for now, we're using it, forever. And I think that's helpful because it enables us in the real estate industry, as well as our consumers, to realize that, technology could be helpful. I think too often, in real estate, people really are resistant to it. Like even our app, we've had a lot of tenants who just wouldn't use it. They feel that it's tracking them, and, we tell them the card that you're using does the exact same thing. This is just more seamless, but I think these types of things will enable people to use that technology more. And this will be a time where people really realize they'll figure out something that makes people's lives better, and it will be huge. And I don't know what it is, but we should talk about it.
For sure. Well, we have quite a few questions rolling in, so I want to make sure we
Sure.
started addressing these. So first of all, George has a question. Craig, can you give me an overview on what you think a phased reentry, a phased return to the office will look like for New York companies?
Yeah, so I think initially it's going to be about 25% of the office that comes in, and then it will go to 50, and then 75. I think that if you're in a benching environment, it's going to be every other seat. I think conference rooms will also be limited to about 5 people. We've been talking to the tenants in our building, and we want it to be safe, but we also don't want it to be hostile, So, we're talking to them, do you want us to take temperatures when people walk into the building? Is that something you want?
Yeah.
And, and we've been finding that tenants are not sure about that. Some of them are like, well, maybe we just do it. We have our employees do it, and that's fine too. So we want to do whatever is best practices, but I think it comes back kind of slowly over time. I'm not an expert on the medicine, but it does seem to me that there will be some sort of treatment that occurs during the summer, which will make things a lot better, and that will really help a lot as well. So that's on the office side, and then people are really going to have to figure out what they do in terms of the trains and the subways. I mean, that's really where it's crowded.
Right.
I've been talking to tenants about elevators, and they're like, you know what, we're taking a train and a subway to get to the office where people are on top of us. So, we're not that concerned about being a little crowded for 30 seconds in an elevator. So, but we are. We're in elevators, for instance, we're looking at different ventilation systems that they use on airplanes for the elevators, just to have that airflow constant and clean all the time. So I think there'll be that. I think in terms of cleaning the spaces, we were doing it actually before we went home. There'll be sanitizing stations for people when they come in, right in the lobby, with Purex and wipes and things of that nature. And then we have our cleaning crew, we kind of double them and have them cleaning the elevator buttons, and then also having it where in the elevators themselves is Clorox wipes on little tables, so people can take that, press a button if they need to. That's on the building where we can't control it. By like in other buildings, we can just have the doorman do it, so he knows who goes where and can do it. But bigger buildings, it's really hard to do it that way. And then your app can do it as well. So that gives you a little bit of choice.
Yeah.
And then, so there'll be some of that. And then I think, we're also looking at, just the way that people come into the building and making sure that it's just never crowded. And I think what will happen, and what we're thinking about with our employees, is having people come in different times of the day and not really during rush hour.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So earlier or later.
Got it. So George's second question, given the new 6-foot social distancing guidelines, how might this impact current office layouts? We touched on this a little bit with Coworking, but how might this impact current office layouts and the ability of some firms to allow their employees to return to their spaces as is?
Yeah, so I think either people will have it so it's every other desk if you're in an environment that's really tight, so that you do have that 6 feet. We've talked to some tenants about putting plexiglass in between their different workstations, so they have at least a sneeze guard or something along those lines that can give people a little bit of comfort in between. I don't know if people in New York are going to wear masks in the office. It just doesn't seem very New Yorkish to me, but I know in Asia, that's what people do in their space itself. We've been looking at a lot of what's been practices in Asia and what they've been doing there. And there are some that I think make sense, some that just don't, seem very American, but we will be, for instance, having, in our buildings, there'll be stations for deliveries that will be separate from the main entrance of the building, which we have now, but then those guests can actually come upstairs and deliver. So whether it's FedEx or food delivery, all of that now will remain downstairs, and we're hiring an additional person who will take all those deliveries and bring it up to this space. We're just controlling who is coming into this space and making sure that all those packages are clean and handled in the right way as well. So other things that we can do to just make sure that social distancing is happening in a good way.
For sure, yeah. All right, Justin has a question. Hello, Craig. Do you expect indoor air quality and elevated levels of certified cleaning to be a part of office building operations going forward?
I do. We're looking at ultraviolet lights for spaces and common areas, and it's really great for killing germs. And then also just having additional, and there are different systems that you can work into your current system. Some seem more likely than others, and they're all good for killing germs and making cleaning spaces. I think so. Regardless of COVID, I think that's the way the future is going, because
Sure.
I think people do want clean space, but none of those right now work for COVID.
David Burgess has a question. How are you planning? This is a tough question, admittedly. How are you planning for a whack-a-mole future where there will be recurrent outbreaks?
Yeah, I think that will happen. There will be. It's just the nature of this, and I think what will happen is different for our space. If someone has COVID, they will work from home, and then I think actually probably most of the office or all of the office will work from home for a 2-week period, and we'll all quarantine and do the right thing, and then go back to work when we test positive. I do hope that there will be additional testing that will really help this as well.
Yeah.
And if that happens, then you could see that it really controls this from happening. But in terms of those, there will be most likely incidents, and you see it happening in Asia when they came back, and they're getting a little bit more incidents. And I kind of look at it as originally this was about making sure that the hospitals had enough capacity, and so long as that's really the case, and everyone and elderly people and people who are at high risk are really in safe places, I think that would be helpful.
Got it. We have a couple more questions. I wanted to, another question kind of came to mind, so I wanted to steal the show here for a second.
Sure.
I'm curious, how are you thinking about kind of the macroeconomical environment related to real estate? Are you, in terms of being an investor, what do you think the tightening of the capital markets and the debt markets kind of do broadly to the real estate industry, and specifically, how do you think that affects New York owners and New York buyers?
Sure. So I mean, you see it happening already. So CMBS is frozen. It's really hard to get debt, and some of the deals where people were already hard, whether it was Peachtree or RFR, where they were buying buildings in New York, they couldn't get the debt that they required to buy the property. And so that all has, some of that has frozen. And what's happening is lenders are really looking for the best in class buyers and assets. And I think that, your past history is more important than ever. The Fed is doing everything they can, and ultimately that will open up, right? So, interest rates should be, are very low, and the spread should be pretty low on this debt as well. So when it does open up, I think it will be very helpful. At this period of time, you're not going to get, lots of leverage, and you're not going to be able, if you're a buyer who's defaulted in the past or doesn't have a relationship or is buying a very risky asset, I don't think you're able to get that. And that will continue for, probably 3 months, depending on what happens, with COVID, maybe
Sure.
6 months. And that opens up some opportunities as well. So we are looking at the debt markets and figuring out if there's some properties we should be looking at in terms of buying the debt of those properties.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. And you sort of asked about it before, but we didn't go into it in full. I mean, the asset classes that are most hard hit are hotels, where there's just an abundance of it. The high-end condo market, which we didn't talk about, there's also so many of those. And I think
that's a fascinating topic. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also, I've been talking to friends in the city who have young kids who are now living at their parents' house or renting a house, and they're saying they want to move to Westchester and other suburbs of New York when this is all over, because they just want more of that space. And I think you'll see some of that happening as well.
Yeah. I'm super curious to watch the move to the suburbs trend, and kind of some of the localism movement. Moving outside of cities to the countryside. I don't know. Did you happen to see Mark Andreessen's article over the weekend?
Which one?
So Mark Andreessen of Andreessen Horowitz, former Netscape founder, he published a pretty, I guess it was somewhat controversial article this weekend. Basically, that was saying like it's time to build. The reason we're in this situation is because we didn't build the infrastructure that we needed as a country to survive a pandemic. And kind of across the board, looked at different industries, looked at supply chain and manufacturing, looked at cities, our cities, our buildings, our infrastructure, and you can kind of run the gamut of where we're weaker than other countries. And he kind of addressed a little bit of hey, we need to start investing into our cities. Cities are basically the representations of the strength of countries, and as we explore this trend of people potentially moving to the suburbs and wanting to leave cities, and them losing population and losing their luster, that's like a really bad thing for America. So I found that topic to be pretty interesting.
That is interesting. I think people will still want to work in a city environment. I really do. I think that people just want that type of energy and come togetherness that the city offers. So I don't think that's changing. I think it's more just where people live might change a little bit.
Totally. Yeah. So Leslie has a question. Hello, Craig. As you have raw spaces, what is the situation with building materials as you are stockpiling materials?
So in our spaces that are raw, we actually, what we do is we buy everything in advance. We do that because we get better economies of scale by doing that. So we have all the materials that we need for our raw spaces to build them out. Right now there's a freeze in New York in terms of construction, but as soon as that's over, we're ready to go and start building our spaces, which is what we do. We tend to build out our spaces in advance, finding that tenants like the way we build it. And if we need to add an office or something like that, we can always do that.
Got it. Another question. Do you plan on making any changes, incorporating any regulations to your tenant lounge at 10 Grand Central to make it more conducive to social distancing?
Yeah, so, if you've been in our space, so our space has always been uber clean. People have commented on how clean it is, but we will continue to clean it even more. I think in the short term, we're not going to allow people to use our coffee maker. We just think it's just too much touching. In terms of our fruit infused water, we're actually pouring all of those out into cups in advance, so those will be out and available to people. But, I think tenants still want to be in space that they can spread out a little bit. The way that our spaces are, people are not on top of each other. So I think you can still use all that social distancing there. In terms of our boardroom, we are going to limit it to the amounts of people that can go there. And then after each time that someone uses it, we're doing a deep clean. So just to make sure that it's, totally disinfected. We're also have purchased a bunch of disinfectant foggers for our bathrooms as well. And then we'll be using a lot more, Lysol and everything like that throughout the day. And we also have the doors open to our terrace. So having that natural air, I think, will be really helpful too. And then we always also have lots of plants and things like that in our spaces, which we do think is good for air quality too. And there in those spaces, that's where we're really looking at the ultraviolet lights as well.
Got it. So another question, we hear about office leases being canceled, disregarding contracts. Are you experiencing such actions, and are tenants really walking away? And then, how do you guys respond to that if a tenant is willing to walk away?
We haven't seen it at all. Actually, we've seen the opposites. We have a lot of leases out right now, probably upwards of 300,000 square feet of leases out, and all of them are moving forward. I'm going to knock on wood there, but
that's great.
And we haven't had any retrading happening either. In terms of new leases, that where the tenant hasn't been to the space, those are not happening right now. They're just on hold. We're thinking about doing virtual tours and things of that nature, but they don't really work. We'll probably do that, but they don't work. People really need to see the space and really understand it, see how it works for them, and see the quality of the building and the cleanliness, all of those kind of things, which I think are more important than before.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that there'll be smaller tours happening. So instead of the whole group of 10 and all different types of people in the company, it's probably going to be 1 or 2 people from the company at a time doing the tour. And we always do is actually have a private elevator anyway for these tours. So that will also allow people to have the necessary spacing that they need.
Got it. So do you see any role for testing at the building level, especially once the Abbott machine becomes more available? I think you touched on this briefly. Or do you believe that that's the responsibility of the tenant or the government?
We're happy to do it. We just don't want to be overbearing, so we wouldn't, I think what we would do is maybe have it available if we were able to get it and have it available, and we can do the testing and have a nurse there who can do all the testing for people. And, we'd be happy to do that. My sense is though, is that a lot of our tenants will do it themselves, or people will do it in their homes as well. And then, there is some talk about having this immunity check or green card or whatever they're calling it, and to get into a building, and that's going to be through an app, and there'll be all sorts of tracing going on there as well. So, we'll really look to the government there. We want to even be ahead of the government. We want our buildings to be known to be healthy and safe places. So think of things that the government's not even doing. But in terms of testing, I think that's something that's just hard to get your hands on right now. But if it were readily available, we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
But I don't think we would do it to prevent people from coming in. I just don't know if that's really our place. I think we would do it as a recommendation, but I don't know if we would require it. But we'd speak to our tenants to see what they would want.
Sure. So Tejas has a question taking us back to the macroeconomic environment. Says with oil going negative, I don't know if did you see all that madness going on yesterday?
Yeah.
Prices and everything. So with oil prices going negative, when do you think interest rates go negative, and how do negative interest rates potentially impact real estate values?
So negative interest rates, for all intents and purposes, interest rates are incredibly low right now.
Yeah.
So, ultimately that helps you in getting loans that are really low, and will also, the cap rates should go lower as well. So we think that's going to be something that happens as well, which to your valuation question before will help values over time. So we could see that happening, in the next 6 months. And I don't know if it goes negative, but it's going to go it's pretty close to zero right now.
Yeah, it's already kind of there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that it's certainly an interesting. It'll be interesting to see if the cap rates do go down, how that does affect valuations. That's going to be an interesting dynamic. So you think that plays out positively?
Yes, over time.
Yeah.
So I think the next 6 months is just a really weird time, and everyone's just trying to figure out, and everything's a bit frozen. And then once things open up, and you kind of get a little bit of clarity on what's happening in the world, and people are back to work, I think you'll start to see a lot more action. And people who are in bad situations, I think those properties will be purchased. But it will take a while. First of all, the courts are just so backed up right now, so it's not like you can foreclose on a property very easily today anyway. So I think all of that's going to take some time. And some lenders are just, hesitant to do anything as well.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that covers most of the questions. I don't know if anyone else in the audience has any other questions for Craig. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I do have a couple more questions for you. So, related to startups and small businesses that are selling to marks during this time. I mean, how do you recommend they approach you? Are you guys willing to pilot new technologies? Are you willing to invest in potentially some upfront capital to try out new tech that essentially could alleviate some of the problems we've discussed today? I think it's a bit of a tough environment because most real estate investors are kind of conserving cash, investing in their core business. They don't want to, they are going to play it more conservatively. But yeah, I mean, just knowing the current environment, how would you advise a startup to approach you?
You know, I must get, I don't even know how many emails a day from groups who are approaching, and it's really not the right way. Unfortunately, if I don't know the person, I don't really even open that email. So really the best way to do it is, you know, first of all, if it's like an in-person meeting or conference or that kind of stuff, and, you know, the person impresses you, I think that goes a long way. But other than that, it's if you know someone, you know, if someone is in your network who can make that introduction really goes a long way. And then, you know, having the type of product that just is very compelling, you know, and really makes, you know, whether it's our lives better or our customers' lives better, you know, then we're all over that, and we would be very interested in it. And especially, you know, I think today more than ever, there's really opportunity for that, you know, for the right type of thing, you know, like, you know, even construction sites, you know, if, you know, having less people and having drones that work on that, or robots for cleaning, or, you know, any type of technology that helps people feel that they're, you know, A, not so densified, and B, clean and easier, any of that type of stuff, we'd be all over it, and we'd be very interested.
Sounds like you have the open for business sign available for people, for startups and small businesses.
So even elevators, you know, we're modernizing our elevators in lots of our buildings, and we're using machine learning in our elevators, which is a new thing, which we hope works really well. But what that means is machine learning will anticipate the user's use. So if you were in our building and every day at 3 o'clock you went to get coffee, the elevator would anticipate that and hover in that area and be there for you. So, you know, it saves 20 seconds, but it makes, you know, your life easier and makes the building that much more efficient. And we think that's, you know, something like that we just love.
That's cool. That is a cool thing. Was that a specific startup that approached you, or was this a technology that the elevator company already had implemented?
Yeah, a mixture of the two. We're going to be pioneers on it, so they haven't implemented it in New York. So we hope it works, but if it doesn't work, it would be good elevators. You know, we're just paying a little bit more for it to do that. And also, we're trying to link it to our phones as well, so it could kind of know where you are at all times and sort of be there when you walk in, and or when you're leaving your office, it's there for you.
For sure.
Yeah.
So, other questions. We have 10 minutes left. I want to know what you are most looking forward to after quarantine.
I think I really like being in a great restaurant with a lot of friends and family, and just like drinking and having a great time. You know? And this sounds weird, but just like, you know, hugging someone, I think I kind of miss that, you know, and just, you know, being outside. I was reading about Michael Cohen and how he's doing house arrest because they're worried about him being in prison with coronavirus. And I kind of feel like we're all in house arrest right now. You know, like there's really no difference where, you know, we're home and we're all safe, and we have, you know, the ability to have, you know, meals and family and that kind of thing. But, you know, just being outside and really, you know, being with other people, I think is really what's missing, that social aspect.
Absolutely. You know, it's really strange. So I live in a multifamily building here in Chicago, and, you know, so there's hundreds of people in my building. Everyone's in their apartment, of course, but on nice days, you know, especially in Chicago, we've had some 60-degree days and sunny, and it's been nice of recent. But I find it fascinating. You see people kind of congregating, like with proper social distancing, but they're congregating on the sidewalks, and like the street right outside of my building is packed, and people are just like searching for that connection.
Yeah. Right.
And I just like, I mean, I wonder when we're actually out of shelter in place, which for Chicago is the end of May, which is a lot longer than I know. Georgia announced yet. Some of our teams in Atlanta and Georgia announced yesterday they're like opening back up.
You could bowl in Atlanta if you wanted to do that.
Yeah. I don't know that I would pick up a bowling ball
I know.
right now at a bowling alley. Doesn't quite seem super sanitary, but to each their own. But yeah, I find like people are yearning for connection. I imagine in like if you live in New York, like you crave social interaction to some degree, right?
Right.
You crave being around people and capturing the energy of people, and that has been missing for a while. And it's almost been like, not only has that been missing, it's, you know, there's this layer of fear in the air, and when that gets alleviated, and when people are actually able to go out and live in New York again, like I'm just super curious to see what happens. I think there's going to be like a lot of great things that come from that.
Sure. And there's such pent up demand right now for that interaction and for that, you know, culture and restaurants and, you know, everything that you love about New York, you know, is on pause right now. So that will come back. And I think it's going to come back big when it ultimately does, because people just want it badly.
Absolutely. Okay. We had another question roll in. For any of your properties that have vacancy, what are you planning on doing to differentiate and compete, as there will likely be an abundance of sublease space on the market? So examples could be reducing rents, increasing concessions, providing flexible lease terms. Like, are you guys thinking about any of that?
We don't believe in reducing rent. And, you know, what we do believe in is just delivering a better mousetrap. And so people want to be in our buildings because it's helpful for their brand and helpful for their culture. And they want to be in an environment that makes them feel good. So that's really how we compete. You know, we're not a commodity offering. We're very special. And by doing that, people want to come to our buildings. You know, we will do, though, make it sort of seamless and easy for them to leave their current space. You know, so we'll build out space for them. They might not even have to come out of pocket at all. So they can just move from one space that doesn't work for them because of the social distancing and they're being too dense, and move to a new space that works perfectly for them in this environment, and also has all those antimicrobial materials and things of that nature that they'll need. And then also we can do this together. And I think a lot of tenants, especially in this environment, really appreciate that. You know, so, you know, we'll put them with architects, but we'll be at the table too, and making sure that their space really works for them. So the way that we compete is just by being better, and then, you know, being cleaner, being healthier, all of those types of things. And then also offering the type of club floor that we do, where there are spaces that people can get away if they need to and not be in a crowded place, but have a different environment in which to work as well.
Interesting. Well, that is it for the questions.
Great.
Craig, what questions do you have for me, if any?
When are you coming to New York? Or are you staying away from New York?
Yeah, I think I'm probably gonna stay away from New York for a little while. It's super interesting because we obviously Zach, who's actually listening in on this call, is in New York. He runs the New York office for Shadow, and so I was planning on getting up to New York quite a bit this year and even in the second quarter. But yeah, I mean, I'm certainly open to traveling. I think I'm going to be very selective about when I do, and it's got to be for the right reason. So maybe we'll have to do like a reentry party at some point, and make it an occasion.
I do have a question for you though. Is there a technology that you've seen that really works for today in the post-COVID world?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you think about, I mean, honestly, a lot of the things that you hit on, I think, you know, proximity tracking in buildings is a thing. There's news over the weekend that Google and Apple are going to be basically enforcing, some proximity tracking, and I think specifically related to office buildings and the footprint in office buildings. You'll definitely see some technology around that. I mean, definitely on the construction side, I would say the same thing. Like when construction sites open back up, like making sure the trades that are coming to the site and not necessarily knowing that there's necessarily knowing like the full population of who's on that job site. There's going to have to be some new proximity measures and labor tracking tools in place to make that a cohesive thing.
Right.
And frankly, like, I mean, I'm sure you've seen a lot of this, but a lot of the AR/VR movement on the real estate side, you know, helping tenants potentially lease buildings, you know, buy properties all virtually. I'm not sure how comfortable people are yet truly with buying a space without seeing it,
Right.
leasing a space without seeing it, but we're getting close, right? We're getting close to that point. And I think there's at some point, I don't know if it's a level with the technology where it actually becomes like, wow, this is like being in the apartment, or this is like being in the condo, where I actually,
Right.
like, I don't need to see it.
Not there yet.
Probably not, definitely not there yet, but I think we're getting closer, and I'm interested to follow like that pattern. The other thing is, like, I think from a housing perspective, I think that one of our investments is a 3D printed housing company, and what I find really interesting about technologies that we've been tracking and technology themes is like they've all adapted to COVID, right? And they, some of the 3D printing companies have been printing PPE, and they've been printing devices that are helping eliminate spread. And I think as you see some of these entrepreneurs and founders be nimble and essentially adapting to the current environment and just providing value in any way that they can, I'm super curious. Like, I don't know what it is, but I'm super curious to see what happens when they start to refocus on their core business, and also have an element of resiliency that they have to figure out. Because and I think right now we really don't know exactly how the next 9 months play out, but I know we all know resiliency is going to be a key theme. And now you have hundreds, thousands of founders who are honed in on that, right? And and again, I don't know what exactly what some of the technologies that emerge. I'm not exactly sure what they'll be, but I know that I'm excited about it. And I think we're kind of waiting to see, and we're having a lot of conversations about what truly is the most important problems. What are the most important problems to solve, and we're kind of starting there.
Yeah, it's exciting. I agree with you, though. I think every company is much more resilient, and we'll all be better for it.
Absolutely. All right, Craig. Well, we're out of time. Thank you. Thank you so much again for joining. I hope this was fun. I hope you didn't feel grilled. A lot of good,
no, it was great.
A lot of good questions from the audience, and thank you everyone for bringing great questions. And again, Craig, thanks for joining. We'll make sure to share, just so everyone knows, we'll share the audio and with anyone who's registered in our Slack channel. You can get access to the video. So if you want to rewatch any parts, if you have questions for Craig, that would be the best place to start. So thanks again for joining, and
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. See you, Craig.